Welcome back, everyone, to another episode on Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Van Mummy, and the goal of my show is really simple: to learn from those who have mastered their craft of what they do. If you're new to my show, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Today, I am joined again by the great David Morgan, founder of the David Morgan Report. So, David, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Well, Ben, thank you. Great. I'm not sure about that term, but thank you for the compliment. And it is the Morgan Report. So thanks.
Awesome, David. So, David, let's kind of get started here by talking about the history of money. So, what is the single most important lesson you've learned about understanding the history of money over the years? And why is this so important for more people across the world to know about?
The most important thing about the history of money is integrity. There has to be trust, total trust and integrity in the system. You can do a paper money system with integrity, but they usually fail. But you could make the argument that the gold standard also fails. Anything with a human element in it is subject to failure or people taking advantage of certain situations or whatever. But the idea is that you have to have trust that's ubiquitous, that's the same for everyone. And that's why the honest money movement or the precious metals have such an integral part, because unless you're clipping coins or you're putting dross metal into the mix and calling it 999 fine when it's only 90% or whatever, regarding which is a form of counterfeiting, unless that takes place, and it has, you've got a standard that's equal for all. And that's something, again, that gets distorted over time. One of my favorite articles I brought to the attention of my Twitter feed and my readers is the paper done. It's actually 3 papers, but gold standard equals fiat in disguise. And this gentleman makes the argument that once you go in a solo or a mono standard, there's no comparison. You only can compare gold only with paper. And of course, under that system, you can go to infinity because you can keep printing until the value of gold or the value of paper becomes so worthless that the reciprocal of that or the gold price becomes infinity. And that's an extreme, but that's a general trend because gold never changes. In other words, an ounce of gold is the same anywhere in the universe. So the main thing is being able to trust the system for everyone at all times. It's good to have it, as a world standard, really. I'm not for globalism, but the idea that, a money works across all jurisdictions, which gold does. And of course, really, to do it correctly, you need a bimetallic or a trimetallic standard. You need gold and silver so that silver is kind of the policeman on the gold. So if the gold price gets changed or adjusted due to the amount of silver supply, they can go hand in hand, and it's not a fixed amount that the marketplace will determine how many ounces of silver equal to an ounce of gold, or how many ounces of copper equal to an ounce of silver, or ounces of gold. So I think that's the best. Now, in the modern world, is that going to be practical or not? And the answer is, from a coin in your pocket standpoint, no. From a representation or a direct link to silver, gold, perhaps copper in a vault, and then doing it digitally, yeah, that does make sense. So we may be moving back toward a new monetary system that's actually based on honest money, but in a different format that we all have regarding, a smartphone, that type of situation.
When it comes to understanding like the monetary systems, it's important to understand, the taking of the collateral. And, there's a book of a writer, David Webb, who you've actually interviewed. And I'm curious to ask, what was it that you learned from his book that you believe supports, your principles of sound money?
Yeah, it's the idea of the ownership relationship to money. In other words, if you own it, it is yours. And in almost all of what David Webb has talked about and verified is that you are a recipient of or the beneficiary owner of X stock, bond, or whatever. And the actual owners are these holding companies, this DTCC and others that actually at law have possession of it Well, when you have what's called the ownership theory of money, and you have it independently, then you have basically the sovereign right to it and the ability to exchange it for whatever you wish to do. So there's something about the ownership theory of money that hasn't been thought about or talked about in a very long time. I ran across it when I was kind of re-studying some of the materials I have back here. And I started looking at what I consider one of my main mentors, although I never met him, but Jerome Smith, who was pretty much very well known in the last major bull market in the 70s and 80s. He wrote several books on silver. He wrote kind of a pamphlet called Silver Profits in the 70s, which I was lucky to find a copy of on eBay for my collection. Silver Profits in the 80s, What's Behind the New Boom in Silver, The Coming Currency Collapse, and several others. And in one of his smaller books, he talked about the ownership theory of money. Unless you own it, then who does? Well, if the bank owns it, then you don't. And that's really the relationship you have in the fiat system. Even though it's your deposit, it's actually at risk because that law, again, the bank is actually the rightful owner. If they bail in on at law because they can, because of a financial problem, then they will issue you shares in the bank. And so now you wanted ready cash, but now you don't have that. The bank's failed and you become an owner. And in those cases that have taken place, the best known is in Cyprus many years ago. Once those shares became available for free trading, you got about 5 cents on the dollar. So you only got about 5% of what your original deposit was. So that's it. Very simple. I mean, these things are common sense and very basic, and they sound archaic in our super sophisticated system where everyone can waft their phone over a reader at the Starbucks or whatever. And all that's, it's convenient. I'm not against it. It's just that we've gotten away from the real meaning of it. And the other part about, a gold coin in your pocket or whatever, to me, and this is, and others, but I don't have a big database, it's seems to carry more weight. Of course, it carries more weight. I'm being funny, but you weight the idea of your purchase a little more. When it's something synthetic just off a phone, it's like, oh, I'll use my credit or whatever and just keep on spending. So that's the way I see it. I think that unless you can grasp the fact that you need to be in charge of your monetary situation and not some third party, that lesson needs to be learned. But I don't think it'll be learned by the general public. It'll be learned by the collapse. Once the system is quote unquote collapsed, or your bank has been closed for 3 days, or your bank account's been changed because of a bail-in, or your insurance policy fails because they were too leveraged, or any of these things that can happen where you take for granted that that money is yours and it's readily accessible, until you learn the lesson that it is not. Most people are just going to bypass on what I just told you.
Do you agree with the quote, gold is money and everything else is credit?
Pretty much. Again, I'm not a believer in the monometallic standard. I mean, there's a whole book called the Wizard of Oz that goes into the Eastern establishment taking over the banking system to where it's a gold only standard rather than a silver and gold standard. But I won't visit that here. But the general idea that money is money and everything else is credit. And this is where I get in a bit of a debate with my peer group, because gold can't reproduce itself. So if you're going to figure out the paper price of gold, it's got to be how many pieces of paper there are versus how many ounces of gold there are. If you do that math, Jim Rickards did it recently. It was 27,000. But other people, like my friend Bill Holter, would say, well, it's got to be at least 50,000 to cover the credit. No, credit is credit and money is money. Money is those, those pieces of paper that are currency that can buy gold. How many of those units do you need to buy an ounce of gold? And it varies, of course. Right now, it's 2,300 or so. When I did the study of how many M0, the base money supply, how many physical dollar bills are there with these different denominations on, versus the 263 million ounces of gold that Treasury purportedly has, that number was $2,500 an ounce. Now it's $27,000 an ounce after 25 years. So it's gone up. It tells you the money supply has gone up about tenfold in the last 25 years. And that that is inflation, pure and simple. So I think the idea is that you have money and you have credit, and they're different. To have credit, you're looking to borrow for the future, whatever, and the system can work with credit, but in fact, it needs it in many cases. But to be the sole basis of the economy and not having enough collateral to back up the system if things start to fail, that's the problem. And we've so overextended. I mean, the idea of having a reserve, even in a fractional reserve system, is you have enough reserves. So if something goes wrong and fails, there's enough reserve in that bank or institution or insurance company or what have you to make good on it. And the old rule was about 10%, but now, of course, there were times in America during recent times with Operation Twist and some of these other financial system makeovers that there basically wasn't a requirement to have any reserves. That's come back, but still they're so minuscule that if something went wrong, there isn't enough reserves to make up for it. Of course, what's happened in the past when that takes place is the Federal Reserve comes to the rescue, they print like hell, and they paper it over. And that can only go on for so long because perhaps the next time the world will catch on and say, oh, I see what they're doing. They're going to print to infinity, where again, the price of gold goes to infinity because there's so much paper, it becomes worth less, and then it's worthless. So that's the trend. That hasn't stopped. And I don't think that the banks are going to tighten any more than they have with the increase in interest rates to make the reserve requirement greater and greater and greater, which would really be a way to secure the system's viability. But we're past that point. I don't think we can rein it in. It's too stressed out. There's too much leverage in the system now to tone it down and bring it back in my opinion.
What is your greatest fear right now in the financial world that you see?
People getting taken advantage of, for people not learning the lessons of history, for people to realize they've worked very hard. I mean, really, any monetary system you want to talk about, honest money, a paper system, a digital only system, a CBDC, what the real exchange is your labor, your intellectual labor, your physical labor, a combination thereof, your ideas, your entrepreneurship, all that stuff is converted into something that has a value that can be exchanged at a later time. That's what it's all about. So, all these systems can work for a while, but the whole idea that you gave your life's energy for something that fails is something that's happened in the past. I don't think it'll happen to total failure, but I think there'll be a huge readjustment. And I think it's totally unfair. I mean, I know life is unfair. One of the biggest lessons I taught both my daughters, but nonetheless, in the realm of your labor, you should be able to get something of value for it that is secure. And whether you spend that something and make a mistake or do a bad investment or loan it out and don't get the loan back, well, that's secondary. That's life. But as far as your labor, you should be able to have something so solid that it marches with you throughout your life, until the day you leave. And that's not the case. And the distortions are greater and greater, and whether or not there'll be a soft landing or not, I rule it out totally. But the system continues on much further than I expected it to. I admit that. I think many in my peer group will say the same thing. But just because it's marched this far, the distortions become greater and greater. Look at how many people are having trouble just buying food, for example. And that's just a small aspect of what's happening with this distorted monetary system.
I've heard you speak before, or at least in conversation with a couple other people before, about the great silver taking. So what is this? And do you think we are coming to or approaching a great silver taking?
I have a quote that I wanted to use, or one of the people I associate with wanted to use in this last year's yearbook. One of the best, there's three major studies in the gold and silver market. It was one of those. I won't name which one, but the silver market is so undervalued relative to any other commodity, gold, the paper supply, oil, or anything you want to name. And it's the second most useful, it's the first most useful mineral on the periodic table. As far as oil really is an element, so I'll call commodities. It's the second most useful commodity. Oil is by far the most useful commodity, but in second place comes silver. So something that useful you'd think would be very valuable, but it's only valued highly when it's one aspect, and that's when it's money. And silver and gold are money. They track pretty much to the natural ratio, how they come out of the ground. So you get this, 20 to 1, 15 to 1, 10 to 1, 7 to 1, whatever that ratio is, seems to fit when they're only money. But since silver is a technological metal and needed so much in a society generally, let alone a high-tech society, it becomes less valuable in terms of its monetary aspect. So the idea is that that will reassert, because people will realize not only is it needed for my cell phone and my flat screen TV and my microwave and my membrane keyboard, but I also need a store of value because the monetary system is disintegrating and it's so cheap relative to gold or any other hard asset, that it's something that I should really take part in. And I think once that consciousness is available to most people that have some savings to preserve, that it'll actually do something similar to what it did in 1980. And that is, it will just do this parabolic move where it starts to not only outperform gold, but almost anything else in a very short time frame. And that's what I'm looking for, is a spike in the silver price at some point in the future. And I don't think it's going to be that far away. The quote unquote problem this time, or the advantageous part to a silver investor, stacker, speculator, is that the dynamics are so in favor of silver this time that you're not going to have this huge amount of silver that comes to the fore like in 1980, where tea sets were smelted down and all that. That could happen, but the structural deficit as projected is greater than the amount of silver supply, with all above ground silver and all mining activity and all recycling. And let me explain. Going from this point forward, the amount of demand in silver for just industry eats up the total supply, recycling, and more, which means the above ground stockpile has to be eaten up. Now, there are variables there. One is that, maybe the amount of solar that's projected to be produced won't be produced at that level. But then again, maybe it'll be greater. We don't know. The amount of investment demand could cease, which is above the industrial supply anyway, but that's what will take the price far higher. Maybe people say, I don't know, I'm going to buy platinum. I don't want to buy silver. Very, very doubtful. So the projection is that we could get a spike, and yet where the equilibrium is could be a very high price, because the amount of demand for industry alone, let alone the people that still want to preserve their wealth by owning some silver, might not be that willing to sell it at a huge paper price or a huge capital gain. They may just be willing to hold on to it because it still is, relatively strong valuation, only projected to go further up in value over time, because the deficit continues through, you could say 10 or 20 years. Now, those are big assumptions. And I want to be clear that that could change. In fact, going back to Jerome Smith and all he wrote and all he knew about silver, he said silver would hit $200 an ounce by the mid 90s. He wrote that book about 15 years earlier. If he wasn't wrong, he was wrong because silver never hit 295. But he's correct in his analysis, because what he did was he looked at how the mining supply was over the last 60 years. It was 350 million ounces a year. Today, we produce 850 million ounces a year. In fact, if it really wasn't for the silver mining boom due to China's build out from about 2000 onward, if that didn't take place, if China was still living as a third world country and there wasn't the demand for all the metals that China needed and all the raw materials like concrete, lumber, everything else, you wouldn't have seen the boom in mining. Anyway, coming back on point. So he said 350 million ounces, 360 million ounces was the top of mining supply. And he was correct looking backwards. But about the time that the ink dried on the book, we went into a different technology for mining and we started to increase mining substantially, which means a lot more supply, which he had figured a constant supply and not an increasing supply. So I could be making the same mistake with these projections that, there might be, a big discovery, which is possible. But right now, look and thinking about that as well. He didn't really think about that, in my view. I have, and thinking that through, I don't see it, but I could be missing something. So I probably over talked it, Ben, but it really looks good for silver going forward.
Just want to stay on this topic of silver. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but where do you see, the price going in the short and long term?
I think we're in the normal summer doldrums. You're going to see a trading range in the summer, probably for July, August, September. August is usually the low for both the metals. I think that will be the case. I think you'll get into the fall, October, November, and you'll see silver and gold both start to reassert themselves. I think by the end of the year, you'll see new highs for this year, gold above 2,500, let's say, and silver in the 33 or so. And then 2025, I think we're going to see an acceleration year where silver could double. Gold, I don't know if it could double. It could. I mean, could is an easier word than would, but I think you'll see an acceleration in 2025. And then depending on what happens, what the nation states come up with a new monetary system, if they propose one, if there's restrictions on capital flows between nation states, what happens with the war efforts, whether they subside or increase. There'll be a lot of factors that will determine what the precious metals do. But on balance, I think even in a calm environment, one no worse than we currently have, you'll still see a massive acceleration in the metals because I think the real estate devastation that's taking place in commercial real estate in the United States hasn't worked its way through the system yet. And a lot of people that have basically counted on things to be status quo with their IRAs, their 401ks, the stock market in general, the real estate market are in for a rude awakening, so to speak, and realizing that these things don't go up forever and they do go up and down, and that there has to be some adjustments made in the monetary reality, and that this is going to hit home and they're going to start asking themselves, well, where do I go? And the answer is one place you can go is precious metals arena. And as that starts to rein into the consciousness of people, not only in the United States, but on a global basis, you'll see a run to gold, I think, like you haven't never seen before.
What is one misconception about silver that you are dying right now to debunk?
Well, one is the ratio is 16-1 in the ground. It's not, it's 7-1. That's just a pet peeve of mine. But I think another one is, using silver as money and people not understanding that, there's, an ounce of silver is about 25, what is it now? Near 30. And that's the average wage in America for the worker. I looked it up on Google. At least that's Google's answer. So an 8-hour day would be 8 ounces of silver. So 8 times 30 would be 240. Is that right? Anyway, the point being is you could pay everybody in silver for about 3 or 4 days, and then you've run out of silver to pay them. So that proves that the value couldn't be used at that level as a monetary system. Basically, it wouldn't have a high enough value. So you'd have to set the value differently to where an ounce would say 10 times as valuable. So instead of being, $20, $30 an ounce is 300 an ounce. In that case, then you could probably use it in the money supply. So it still has a monetary aspect. There's no doubt about it. but to be valued as a monetary asset, it's incorrect. To be valued as a commodity only, that's debatable, but a lot of these primary silver mines are mining about 20, so they're not making. There's something I have in the Morgan report I got from Dr. McGaw, Peter McGaw, one of the best geos in Mexico, friend, just retired, called Archie's Rule. And it talks about commodities in general. If you really want to have a sustainable mine, you need a 2x. 2x means if you mine it out of the ground at 15, you need a $30 silver price. If you mine it out of the ground at 28, we'll round it up to 30, you need a $60 silver price. And that's well, God, that's such a huge margin. No, it's not, especially for a mine, because there's factors in the mining industry that you don't see in other industries. For example, all mines end in failure. I mean, every ounce you take out of the ground depletes your asset, the mine's asset. And then all mines end in failure, no matter how rich they are. So you have to take some of that capital to go explore and find another asset somewhere. And that's not really factored into the thinking of most people that think about, the gold mining industry. So there's a lot to it. I didn't probably do a good job on the value of silver as a monetary asset, but the point I made is, I'll say it again, if you use silver at the current price in the monetary sphere, it is so minuscule to the amount of paper out there, it would have very little meaning. To make it have meaning, it's got to be in the monetary system like gold could be, or maybe will be. You'd have to reprice silver commensurate with the monetary ratio, which is 15 to 1, or maybe 10 to 1, or something along those lines for it to have any real meaning. People think, well, we'll go back on silver. Not at this price. It'd have to be valued far higher.
Right. No, I appreciate that answer. And David, something that I want to ask you as well is sometimes investors can be very impatient with silver because it's so volatile. So what advice would you give to someone that has been patient and is waiting for this great silver taking?
Well, that's a tough one. In fact, I just got a question almost identical to that from one of my members, and I did a video for the membership. And he said, I can see where we're going. Things are looking up for the silver price. I've been with you a very long time, but I'm not sure. I could take a high level consolidation like you're outlining, but I'm not sure I could take another, huge downfall in the silver price. I'm just so worn out. Could you comment? He basically was asking how low could silver go? The answer is no one knows. My projection is the worst it would get would be about 26. That's an area that I showed on the chart for various reasons that I think hold a lot of support. And but what do you say? You've been patient this long, you need more patience. Uh, I guess that's the answer. For myself, of course, I'm I'm so stubborn. I'll hold on to the bitter end. I think the other answer, or part of the answer, is the right proportion. I mean, a lot of people that are in the silver market probably bought more than they should or could have to be content through the downturns. It's great when you make a bet at a casino and you win. You never bet enough. But when you lose, it hurts. And the same thing with, the precious metals. I mean, they are outside the norm. Most people never consider them as investments. People that understand it usually go full hog or very deeply into it because they understand why the monetary systems always fail. And that gives them an advantage, but then when? And now they've got the time value of money working against them. If silver and gold go down for the last 12 years, which they have, and just now are coming out of those doldrums into gold, particularly making new nominal highs, and silver just catching up in the 30 range, which was the high 11 years ago. So I would just say you got to understand yourself. I mean, if you've held that long and you can't hold on couple more years, then why? If you've held that long, you may as well hold on for a couple more years. If you are breaking even at 30, that $30 bill you're going to get for today is certainly not worth what it was in 2011, but at least it can psychologically make you feel better to lighten your load, get even in nominal value, and maybe take a different approach to the market where you're not overloaded or overweighted. course, if silver takes off to 50 next year, they'll say, I wish I wouldn't have sold out. So it's an individual choice. I don't really have a good answer. I wish I did. But it's basically most people that buy silver buy it for the right reasons. There are people that buy it, before during the early Bitcoin days that expected a Bitcoin type of experience of silver, which does take place, but it's very rare and it's very short. I mean, if you look at the run in April of 2011, I mean, you look over those last few months, I mean, you really got the acceleration over just a few months. And that's something that I'm well aware of. And I plan to give my membership the benefits of selling into that kind of a move. I've been lucky so far. I've called the 3 previous ones. Hopefully this next one, which should be the biggest by far and could go the furthest, it's going to be hard to call because there'll be so much talk and interviews, and even the mainstream is going to be talking about silver, and there'll be a lot of buying pressure. And to sell when it keeps going up is very difficult, especially if you sell at 100 and it goes to 200. I mean, I'd have a lot of people upset with me, but I have a plan for that. So that's to basically take it out in tranches and, have a plan and stick to it. And then, of course, the last question is, well, really, do I sell silver for paper? What are you talking about, David? I mean, you preach the whole time that paper is going to be worth less and less and less. And the answer is we'll address that when it comes. But yeah, if you could exchange it for paper, move that paper into an asset real quickly, like real estate or land, or maybe stocks, or maybe a business or some other thing, then yeah, you probably would do that. But if you were going to hold it just in paper, at that point in time when silver and gold are accelerating, I wouldn't want to hold paper for very long.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. Right now, you're currently working on a documentary series, and I think that's really cool, especially at this point at your current age. And so I would love, if you could share with my audience, what is this documentary series? Who are some of the guests that you're interviewing? And what is like the reason behind doing this documentary series?
Well, in reverse order, the reason was that, even though I've written 3 books, mostly about, honest money, the silver market, gold, how markets are moved, history of silver, all that stuff. Most people don't read books anymore. I mean, very few sales. And that didn't discourage me. I felt it was my duty to write the Silver Manifesto with Chris Marchese. But I thought, how to get the word out. And the best way is the internet and what's on the internet. And it's, interviews like yours, but also movies, documentaries. And so I decided the reason to do it was I wanted to reach more people. And the primary aspect of it is, the spiritual side of money, which most people don't talk about very often. And I am more and more. And how it affects everyone, as I've always talked about. I mean, money, you know, transcends everything. I mean, money transcends your religious background. It transcends your nationality. It transcends your political beliefs. It transcends what kind of diet you have, all carnivore, total vegan. Transcends all those things. Everybody's interested in their money and what it'll buy and what it's worth and what it's going to be worth in the future. So it transcends everything. It's the one almost common bond between all of humanity. So it's a very important topic. And if the system is being destroyed, it's probably the most important topic you can think about, or at least understand. And so that's the reasons behind the documentary. And on the spiritual side, it's like, well, what is this money thing, and how can we get around it or through it, or be in tune with it where it serves us rather than controls us? Because right now, the way the system is set up, it's a control mechanism for the elite banking class to create something out of nothing and use that power, that monetary power, to buy all the Congress critters, buy the senators, buy the parliament, buy the political class generally. Are all political class bought and paid for by the bankers? No, there's about 2% that aren't. But for all practical purposes, yeah, they are. And that's the truth, and people don't like to hear it. Most people that are aware of shows like yours know it to the core of their being. That's the way the world works. So how do you circumvent that? And that's what we look at in the movie. So I've got probably one of the most important interviews, and that's with G. Edward Griffin, who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. I mean, what's in that book is pretty much an outline of not only how the system works, but what the NWO will look like. He's pretty spot on. He wrote that book years ago. I've got Foster Gamble that did the Thrive series, Thrive 1 and Thrive 2, who I think did probably one of the best financial pyramids available. It shows how the world really works with us and the animals and nature at the bottom of the pyramid. And the next one up is government. So government's about as low as you can go. They're just above us. And then above that, what's there? Corporations. And what's above there is the commercial banking system. So the commercial banks run the corporations run the government. That's how it works. But most people think that, the president of the United States is the most powerful person on the planet. Now the Pope has more power than the president. So I go into that. So I've got Foster Gamble, one Mark Passio, which probably isn't really familiar, it might be familiar with some of your audience. Mark is probably works as hard as anybody. He's probably more on fire than I am. And he talks about natural law and how natural law works. And he's dedicated his life to it. And I see his frustration because as important as it is to understand the way the world really works and to get along with it and in it and abide by it and have basically quote unquote happy life or fulfilled life or a life with meaning, you've got to understand natural law, which he teaches it very well. He does a very good job, but yet it's very cumbersome on him because he's worked so hard and the results are rather mediocre, in my opinion. I think he'd agree with me. I hate to put words in anyone else's mouth. He's there. Got some spiritual people, more of the conventional and unconventional side. Of course, myself, I'll be in it. We're working. I have Ellen Brown, who wrote Web of Debt, who's got a different take on some of the solutions than I do. She's more of a statist than I am, but I don't say she's wrong. I'm not saying I have the answers. I have a lot of questions. Certainly she needs to be heard. Her idea is to go back to something like the greenback under the Lincoln administration that John F. Kennedy proposed before he got assassinated. And that is to have the Treasury issue the currency rather than a private banking cartel, which certainly would be an improvement, in my view, over the system we have now. So I think I could go on, but I'm very passionate about it. I think it's a good way to reach a lot of people. And the spiritual aspect is that we've got to get over this idea that we don't have enough. We've got to have the idea that we start with ourselves. So our innermost being, that we are put here, we are born, we have something that is so special that we in and of ourselves are enough. And we're constantly taught that we're not enough. You're never going to be enough. You got to get this degree or have this friendship or this watch or that, type of clothing or this hairdo or all this nonsense that we're pounded with continually. To be something, you have to have something. To be something, you have to be. You have to have something in and of yourself, and you have to have, I don't like the word self-esteem because it's way beyond that. It's really not selfishness. It's really being in tune with what we really are, what our capabilities are. And we're all unique and we all have gifts. And to tune into that and realize that you are enough and move on from there. So in other words, I want to throw the Maslow's hierarchy of needs upside down. The top is self-actualization after you've got enough, food and water and shelter and clothes and all that stuff. I'm not saying we don't need those things. Of course we do. But what I'm saying is, if I turn the pyramid upside down and you were born, and by the time you hit, first grade, you were self-actualized. You knew that you in and of yourself were an all-powerful being, spiritual being living on this planet in a physical form, and you had all you need, and you knew that the world was abundant. The universe always provides, and you had that kind of attitude. You'd have a different relationship with money. You'd be in control of it rather than it being in control of you. I hope I made sense there because that's sort of the essence of what I'm trying to get to.
I read a little bit about your film, and I could tell that you're also trying to help the everyday person reconsider their views of money as either good or evil. So what did you mean by that? If you could just talk about that last point.
Well, money should be neutral. It should be, fair for everybody. It shouldn't be delegated to a certain class of individuals, which it is now. So I think that the power of money as it exists now is for people to think that they can have power, first of all, in themselves, as I just outlined. But secondary, there does come some power from having honest money, having the ownership of money that we talked about previously. And I think if I can wake up enough people into that idea, that they could take that idea forward. So it doesn't necessarily have to be silver and gold coins. It could be your labor exchanged for someone else's labor. And that, of course, is really very equitable because both sides agree. You know, my group is going to come over and build your help you build your barn. And because of that, we're going to exchange, so many, so much food or whatever. So there's a lot there that I think people need to understand, that they have more control than they think they do, that you can be outside the box, and also to re-examine what a new system might look like. Could there be a system where we don't even use money? I mean, could we go to the Star Trek situation? And most of this hinges on energy, which I get into in the movie as well, because anyone that wants to go a step further than our discussion here, Ben, can look at the morganreport.com/monkey, MONKEY. And there's a movie clip there from a scientist from Germany named Harold Kotzvella. And he does lectures all over the world, and he does all kinds of off the wall topics like Morgellons, black goo, several things. I've listened to several of his lectures, and he does one. I clipped one from one of his lectures about this experiment that was run by biologists on teaching apes how to use money and what the outcome was. And I'm going to put that in the movie because it kind of turns the whole idea of money upside down. So I'll just leave that as something you can put in the show notes. And maybe some of your viewers would like to watch that to get kind of I would say, perhaps a wake-up call on what this whole monetary system really involves.
And David, I want to ask you a question more related to investing principles that you've learned over the year. If you could share with my audience, what is one lesson or investing principle that you would love to share?
Find value and don't be in a hurry. I mean, the Buffett approach is pretty solid. I mean, Graham, who wrote, securities analysis. I mean, you go back to the old school works. Right now, Tavi Costa, who's one of the younger guys and kind of a leader in our sector, very thought-provoking mind. He's really quite good. They talked about it just a few days ago about value investing. We'll come back. So you want something. I mean, the whole idea of owning a business is you own a business to do something you love to do, and at the same time make money at it or make a profit and feed your family and enjoy your life. And the idea of stocks are you can do that passively. I can buy into that business, and just because I've given them my capital, I don't have to actually run the business. Someone else does that, but I get to share in the profits. That's what the idea of a stock, portfolio is all about. That's been lost for the most part. There's very little thought about what's the dividend I'm going to receive, what's the profitability of this company, how much does it earn in a year, and how much of that earnings do I get as a shareholder. Most of that's very seldom thought about. Of course, there are investors that think that way, but they're few and far between. It's all about, what's this idea and what's it going to be worth in the future, and who cares what the multiple is. I know they're not going to make money now, but they will someday. And how far can I push the stock on this momentum? And that's taken over the whole system for the most part. I mean, again, there are others that look at the market differently, but so that is what I would suggest. You be ahead of the game, because as we go into the next Great Depression and reality is bestowed upon everyone, whether they like it or not, they can't escape it. We'll start to revalue things, which is also part of my documentary. And we'll look at the value of each other, hopefully, in a better way, rather than a consumer. You're a human being. You have a heart. We have a relationship. I'm talking to you. Let's be present for each other. Let's really have the gift of life. Let's learn the art of living again. Let's slow down. Let's not be stuck to our phones, taking the right picture of ourselves all day long. Why don't we really get back to basics? I mean, old school is probably an overused term, so I'll use something else. Let's just get back to some common sense again. Let's treat each other with some dignity and respect And let's put integrity back into the system. Let's put integrity back into the monetary system. Let's put integrity back into our word for what we say we really mean it. And if you don't mean it, admit it. Hey, Ben, we'll have to have coffee sometime. If you don't mean it, you should call back up and say, you know what, I keep saying that and blowing you off, and we never will have coffee. But I really do want to get to meet you and know you better. So let's set an appointment at noon next Tuesday at XYZ, right? I mean, the word of your word means is a powerful thing. And people just, have empty, in my opinion, have empty conversations or just spew rhetoric for no reason, just to sound cool or look cool or say the right thing that makes people feel good at the time with no real meaning behind it. I mean, I would say live purposefully. If you're just spouting off to joke around, that's fine as long as people understand the context. But don't put yourself in a position of doing something that needs integrity and then you don't have.
I appreciate that answer there, David. Lots of respect on my end. And David, this is your third time now being on the show. And who is a future guest, someone that you know personally that you would like to see on the show? In our past conversation, you brought up Patrick Wood.
Yeah, Patrick Wood would definitely be one. I would say David Dubine, who I just interviewed recently. I mean, David does a lot of hard work, and he's gone from, coffee broker and what he did in China to basically being pretty much a full-time farmer. I mean, he came out there to Tennessee and bought some raw land, and he's got trees all over the place and animal husbandry, and he's learned it all on his own. So it shows again the human spirit. I mean, you can, move somewhere without much knowledge at all. Of course, the internet, you can gain a lot in a hurry, but you also have to do the work, and he's done that. But it proves that, with the spirit and the willingness to learn new things and do new things, you can recreate your world, and he really has. And what he knows about the coming food crisis, I think, probably not the most, I would call him an expert at it, but he's pretty well versed in the topic. And I think this is a subject that isn't addressed enough. Not only are we diminishing the food supply for various reasons, but also the quality of the food is quite important, and we've diminished that as well. So something that's important to the human being is, food and water isn't really discussed enough in my view. So I'd highly recommend having David Dubine on.
I appreciate both of those names, David. And David, before we wrap up, where's the best place, for my viewers to connect with your work?
Well, the best place is the landing page, the main site, themorganreport.com. And secondary, if you're interested in the movie, just go to silversunrise.tv, and you can see it continually changes, by the way. It's not daily, it's more like monthly. But as we interview more and more people, we have more and more movie clips on available to see kind of a hint about what the movie's all about. And we're also have an email function that you're able to contact us and let us know what your thoughts are on what you'd like to see in the movie or who you'd like to see in the movie. Obviously, we can't cater to everybody's demand, but it helps us, think maybe a little further who maybe we would put in the movie, or maybe change some aspect or the questioning of people that we are going to interview in the future. So, in other words, you get to participate whether or not directly has an effect or not. Well, I can't determine that ahead of time, but it could.
Great, David. Well, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And David, before we go, I just want to, thank you again for being here today. I feel like every time we chat, there's so much I learn, and I really appreciate, your mentorship to both myself as well as my audience. And is there any last final words that you would like to end off with?
Yeah, I run pretty deep. I think anyone that's met me knows that or can feel it. And it's all sincere. It's my authentic self. So I'd say one of my, I would say character defects, but one of my less known attributes, and one I like to improve, would be better sense of humor, a little lighter. And so my favorite joke is, these two guys that were seekers, and they were seeking enlightenment. They've been through, all these courses and several books, the Bible, the Quran, and just basically studied everything. So they finally decided to go to Tibet, hike to the top of the mountain and find the guru in the cave, and they do it. And it was a treacherous, long, cumbersome journey, but they make it to the top of the mountain. There's a cave, and the guru comes out, this long beard, and these guys tell them all they've been through, all their journey, all they've read, all they've experienced. They still don't have it. How can we learn to enlighten it? And the guru looks at them and he says to them, enlightenment. You want enlightenment? Lighten up. So that's one of my favorite jokes, and I have to remind myself to lighten up. As heavy as this world may look, and as, difficult as it is at times, and I think we all have our trials at times, all of us, there is a very light and great aspect to the magic of life. So don't ever lose that. There's two sides to every coin, and it's the same thing, the dawn before the dusk and all that stuff. So lighten up. Tell myself to lighten up, and I'll ask your audience to lighten up as well.
Well, David, thanks again for being here.
My pleasure.